Okay, I'm back here to continue our discussion on the themes of biology. So up to this point, you should have watched the ecology video, right? So learning that ecology is the scientific study of the interactions involving our mutualisms, our competitions, our predatory interactions, parasitic interactions. All of those fall within the realm of ecology. And again, we're going to progress through the whole semester, and every chapter, every taxonomical group that we cover, we will elaborate a little bit. We'll emphasize on the ecological links that are relevant for the particular organisms. Yeah. So let me continue onwards with our sort of our second column or second pillar that supports the course, a major theme of Biology 1307, which is the evolutionary concept, right? So evolution can be simply defined, and that's again a little bit misleading, but we simply define it as genetic changes in populations from generation to generation. So as Darwin mentions, descent with modification. And we look at the idea of, let's say, you and me, right? So we are not clones of mother, we're not clones of father. We are combinations of the two. So even at the individual level, we have changed. We're a different, unique genetic combination than either of our parents. So that would fit within the definition of evolution. Now, evolution goes a lot more in depth, but we're looking at things that change over time. So if we can back up and look at ecology and define it in one word, right? Ecology, we define with interactions. Evolution, we're going to define with change, right? The changes that happen over time, may be slowly over a long period of time, may be very rapid in a very short amount of time. But the key idea of evolution is change, right? So when we look at this picture here, we look at the idea of basically, I think you could figure out this is ecology, right? We have a predatory interaction going on here. My question would be then, well, why, right? Why was this particular lion successful and this particular buffalo lunch, right? So we look then at the evolutionary sort of basis that underlies both organisms. So this lion was strong, fast, good eyesight, good strategy, smart intelligence. Maybe this buffalo was slow. Maybe couldn't hear from the left ear, couldn't see from the right eye. There may have been some evolutionary flaw in its genetic composition, right? So what a lot of students like to consider is that ecology is very separate from evolution, that both of these things are completely isolated, and that's not the case. So the evolution and the ecology are very, very tightly integrated, and they kind of put the particular organism within the context of its environment and make some of the ecology easier, make some of the ecology more challenging for it. So if you are a strong lion, fast, it's going to be easy to be a predator. If you're a very weak, slow lion, the ecology of being the predator is going to be very, very challenging for you. So again, the ecology sort of drives the evolution, and I should say the evolution drives the ecology, but ecology also has an impact on the evolution. So if this lion is big and strong and fast and is able to grow nice and strong, it will most likely pass on its genes to the next generation. So it will have healthy babies. Yeah? This buffalo's been killed, been eaten, so its genes have been removed from that population. So it will not be able to continue passing on its genetic composition to the next generation. So again, both ecology and evolution are very, very integrated, very tightly linked. Yeah. Now, when we get into the idea of evolution, we're going to look at four mechanisms, four factors that can trigger this genetic change over time. Right, so we're going to start kind of with the simple and kind of progress a little bit to the more complex. But the 4 factors that cause evolution will be mutations, selection, gene flow, and genetic drift. So we're going to address each one of these individually. Let me start first with the mutations. So mutations are the simplest, most direct, fastest way of generating change over the course of geologic time, over the course of genetic code. It's the fastest, easiest way, and what it is any change, any change in the organism's DNA. So if you remember the genetic sequence, the A's and T's and C's and G's, double helix, mutation is either a point mutation, one adenine, one guanine, one cytosine, one thymine has been damaged and replaced with the wrong nucleotide, the wrong base. It might be a point mutation, it might be a frame shift mutation. It's one of the mutations that causes a genetic change in the genetic sequence, right? And again, this is known as the origin of genetic variation. This is where genetic variation stems from, these mutations. This slide is a little bit misleading, and I got to go back and actually tweak this a little bit, but we say most mutations are random and harmful. Okay, that's half correct. Most mutations are random. That is true. We'll give them credit there. Whether a mutation is harmful or whether a mutation is beneficial, we can't say just initially, right? We know that the mutation caused a change. Whether that change enhances the health, the life of the individual, or whether it decreases its ability to survive, depends on the external environment of the, the mutation, the evolutionary aspect, then will have an impact on the ecology. If the ecology is benefited, great. If the ecology is made more challenging, then that's a negative situation. So again, most mutations, yes, are random. Mutations can be harmful to the organism. Mutations can be beneficial to the organism. It depends on the situation. So in this situation, we see a mutation that caused multiple legs. So lots of legs on this frog there, right? You think, well, more legs would make the frog be able to hop better or swim faster. But the legs are not quite functional. They're taking up more energy. They're not helping the frog. They're making it more difficult to move. So we can agree that the dead frog laying on the table here, that was a harmful mutation. Another type of mutation, and you look at this little parasite there, this little child with blue eyes and fair skin. So those are 2 mutations, right? The eye color is a mutation and the skin color is a mutation. So the quote unquote wild type of human would be the genetic sort of, if you want to think of it as the default sort of phenotype, would be brown eyes and dark skin. Well, this child is neither brown-eyed nor dark skin. So we look at the eyes. So the eyes are because of a recessive mutation, as is the skin. So in this particular example, the child with blue eyes, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is this mutation of fair skin, is it good or bad? Well, again, it may have no impact, or we can argue, well, maybe with light skin, it makes it easier to get sunburn. So easier to get skin cancer, that might not be good. With blue eyes, it might make the child more attractive, might make the child more likely to get a date to the prom, something like that, right? So in that situation, it might be beneficial. So again, mutations, the basis for genetic variation, random, caused by external situations, radiation, viruses can cause mutations, mutagenic chemicals, whatever the case, the change happened And whether it's harmful or beneficial then depends on the organism's ecological interactions. So I have 4 pictures that I found here. I'll let you kind of be the judge. I have a white mutation, a white cat living in a domesticated world. Is this a good mutation, a bad mutation, or a really no effect mutation? Normally cheetahs are supposed to be spotted. Well, here we have a mutation where the cheetah is a little bit darker and more striped. So is this a good mutation, a bad mutation, or no effect mutation? I don't know. You're normally a dark brown, greenish alligator. Now you have a mutation in which your skin is white. So you have this white alligator kind of approaching, sneaking up on prey. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or a no impact? Here we have flies with normal eyes. Here's a mutation that puts a little cluster of we call ocelli, little eyes, compound eyes, on the sort of its underarm area. So now the fly can see things coming from in front of it. It can see things coming from beside it. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or a neutral mutation? So again, I think it depends on the situation, right? So a very similar mutation, white cat, white alligator, may have very drastic differences in survival depending on where these organisms live on a daily basis. Yeah? So just refreshing your 1306 knowledge, going from the DNA transcription to RNA translation to amino acid. Here we have a mutation. Instead of CTT, we have CAT, which changes our mRNA. Transcription works correctly, but our template is different. We then translate that into the incorrect amino acid. So if you remember your different mutations from 1306, this would qualify as a missense mutation. We changed the primary protein structure, which causes that protein to shift and fold differently. And basically, it would change the functionality of that protein. In this case, in humans, we would then cause our red blood cells to become very fragile and break and sickle and look something like that. So this is the genetic basis for sickle-celled anemia, that one amino acid change. So again, depending on the situation, we know that yes, the DNA was changed, the protein was changed. Did it help the organism or did it harm the organism? So that's again that first mechanism of the evolutionary process, mutation. We're going to progress now to selection, and selection is shown here. So this bird is eating the blue caterpillars. So it's selecting blue, right? Now, why is it selecting blue? Do they taste better? Are they easier to see? Are they slower, right? So for whatever reason, this bird is having a preference to one type of phenotype, one physical appearance. And that's going to have an impact. So the ecology, again, will have an impact on the evolutionary long-term process there. So when we cover selection, I have to cover Charles Darwin. I can't cover selection without mentioning Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin is a portrait, I guess, an artist rendition of Darwin. He was around in the 1800s, 1809 to 1882. And I don't know if you know any history of Charles Darwin. I'll try to link a little video that gives you a little bit of an insight into his background. But Darwin, I consider Darwin to have had one of the most awesome jobs you could ever have. You know, maybe it's just me, but I don't know, maybe you may or may not agree. But at a very young age, Darwin was given a boat and given a crew, right? So he worked in Europe as he worked in one of these big museums. And I can envision in the sort of early to mid 1800s, they didn't have movie theaters, they didn't have, video games. So what did people do for fun? And you had to, take the family, get the kids out of the house for a little while. What would you do? Well, I suspect museums were kind of like modern day zoos, right? I think they were a big attraction. People would go and spend money, go spend the day at the museum and see different, creatures from around the world, dinosaur bones, that kind of stuff. So Darwin's job was to go out and bring cool stuff back to the museum, right? So again, I don't know if you like to travel, right? I personally love to travel, and I'm a little bit jealous of Darwin's trip that he made, right? This is an awesome voyage, right? So given his boat, given a crew, so he departed from Europe, went down, stopped in sort of Africa for a bit, Western Africa, went down to South America, Rio, got to see then the sort of this very lush tropical rainforest, right? The Amazonian forest. Now, keep in mind, this was in the 1800s. How much wilder you think these places were back then, before the, before National Geographic magazine, before drone and satellite imagery, before these companies going and destroying all these massive, natural ecosystems and forests. So I think he got to experience these places in a very, very wild type of setting. Yeah. So spent some time around South America, went all the way around, came back up, went to the Galapagos Islands, which he made famous. Stayed there for a while, studied these large tortoises, finches, different species. Went across, came over here to New Zealand, Australia, Tasmania, went up to Madagascar, South Africa, back to South America. And this voyage took him several years. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I would love to travel to these countries. And even today with, airlines and fast travel, I haven't been to all these places. And in a very young age, in a very wild setting, Darwin was able to experience all this. So again, quite amazing. And I think if it was you that had been on this journey, you would have seen so many things. It would have had a huge impact on the way that you see the world, the way that you process information. It would destroy a lot of stereotypes and really help you analyze how things work out in the world. So that's sort of the context in which Darwin came up with a lot of his evolutionary theory here. Yeah? So again, I'm going to post a link to the video. Please watch the video and bring that knowledge back with you here, right? So Darwin came back after that long voyage. Imagine all the stuff he brought back, all the stuff he had written in his notes and specimens, and just amazing what he probably experienced. But he didn't immediately publish his data. He procrastinated. And I bet you've procrastinated, but I bet you've never procrastinated for 14 years, right? So it took Darwin around 14 years sort of to kind of get motivated to start publishing his work. And I think if it wasn't for this guy, Alfred Wallace, we never would have heard about Darwin, right? But Alfred Wallace was this young, motivated sort of biologist that, kind of went out and tried to come up with a lot of his same ideas as Darwin, right? So Darwin in 1858 then went to the scientific community along with Wallace, and they presented their ideas. Right? And it was known that Darwin came up with the ideas first, so he was given sort of credit. And in 1859, he published a very impactful book in biology, which is The Origin of Species. Right? It made a huge impact for many, many reasons. So one of the big ideas that came out of Darwin's book was the term that was stated for the first time ever, natural selection. Okay, so now let's understand. So Darwin um, proposed that species change and adapt over time. He wrote a big book, and that's basically what the big book stated, right? That species change and adapt over time. Now, Darwin didn't know anything about genetics. That was Mendel that discovered this later. He didn't know anything about DNA. Watson and Crick discovered this in the 1950s. So he didn't have the actual knowledge of how it worked. All Darwin said was, I think species change and adapt to their environments over time, period. How they do this, he called that natural selection. The agent, the mechanism that produces change is natural selection. So he gave many examples in his book. So in one island, there's a lot of little caterpillars. So the birds develop these little beaks to get caterpillars. In islands where there's no caterpillars and there's big chunky seeds, the bird's beaks are very strong to break those seeds. So how did the bird develop this big beak? By the process of natural selection. The species change and adapted over time to its localized environment. Right? And if you read number one, okay, species change and adapt over time. All right, whatever, yeah. But back then, this was like, oh my God, I cannot believe Darwin. I can't believe what I just heard. This is blasphemy, right? So keep in mind that in that time in Europe, there was a big idea that species were created by divine intervention and species were created perfectly, right? So to challenge that was to challenge basically the whole idea of religion and creation. And that was a big sort of blasphemous thing. Darwin was considered to be like a heretic at the time, you know? So it made sense that he procrastinated. Darwin was a pretty smart individual. He kind of knew what was going to happen when he proposed his ideas, right? So he kind of waited for, I guess you want to call Wallace like a wingman to go with him and get some of the blame as well too. But this is the history of Charles Darwin, the proposed idea of natural selection. So what is natural selection? We define it as differential reproductive success of individuals. We define this as survival of the fittest. Yes, survival. You have to live long enough to survive, but not just survive, you have to reproduce. You can have the strongest, most awesome organism, but if it doesn't reproduce, it doesn't pass its DNA on. So there has to be that reproductive link that passes on the genetic information. And again, if the organism is well adapted, it's probably going to survive. And if it survives long enough, it's probably going to reproduce. So this is the idea of natural selection. Differential reproductive success of individuals. All right, so what does this mean in English? Differential reproductive success of individuals. Not every set of parents has the same number of offspring. And according to Darwinian sort of theory, organisms that have bigger families, more amounts of offspring, leave more of their DNA for the next generation. I don't know if you have grandparents with big families, right? Or maybe if you're a small family, let's say you're a single child. So your parents then would have left only one child with their half of genetic information. If the families, what does that show on TV? 20 kids and counting or something like that. So this couple that they've had like 20 kids. So according to Darwin, if you have 20 kids, Darwin would say, wow, that's a very good reproductive success, right? They left a lot of DNA for the next generation. So in the realm of evolution, the more offspring you leave behind, the more successful you're viewed as leaving more of your DNA to be, passed on and mutated and selected for in future generations there, right? So the idea of natural selection. So we're going to kind of use this idea of being selected for or being selected against. Now, this brings back a lot of memories. I don't know if you did this as kids. You had the neighborhood kids there, and you're picking teams. You're team captain. You got to pick a kid for your team. Right? I don't know what you're playing, soccer or kickball, or I don't know what you're playing. But if it's your pick, who would you pick? I think most of you would probably pick this tall kid here, right? Or maybe some of you might feel bad for the little kid. Maybe you'll pick this little one. But you're going to select for your team. And if you don't select for your team, basically you're selecting against. They're the ones that you're going to play against, no? So we're going to use this vocabulary, being selected for, but not for your team. Life selects certain genetic combinations for continual survival, or life selects certain physical qualities for being eaten, for being destroyed, for being killed, right? So again, being selected for continual survival or against for being removed from the population, basically. So I'm just gonna get to this slide here. I wanna kind of introduce a little bit of this video of Dr. Nachman, Michael Nachman. It's a really neat video that shows the idea of mutation and then the selective factors that are in place here, right? So looking at the selection, natural selection of light and dark colored mice based on this little mouse model, little pocket mice model. And I think it does a pretty good job. So I'm going to stop this video here. I'll upload this video, and then I'll link in Michael's link to this video as well. So check those out. See if we can make sense of Darwinian concepts of selection, right? Being selected for or being selected against. Okay? So then we'll continue onwards from here after you watch this video. All right.